Good afternoon. I'm Adriana Farmiga, artist and Associate Dean of the Cooper Union School of Art. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you're staying warm. We are delighted to be starting the new year with our continuing series of Public Art Fund virtual talks at the Cooper Union. Today's conversation is especially suited to a virtual gathering since it celebrates an exhibition featuring works from artists from around the world and that are on view right now in several US cities. It's an exhibition that also prompts us to look more closely at the changed world we now live in, at the pandemic's sharpening of divisions within our communities and across the globe, and at the role of public art in connecting us with one another. It's this focus on bringing together different critical and creative perspectives and elevating our shared struggles that quintessentially is what Cooper Union's programs are about. For more than 160 years, Cooper has brought a variety of voices in activism, education, culture, and so much more to New Yorkers and now virtually around the world at no cost. We're thrilled to partner with Public Art Fund and are thankful for our ongoing collaboration in making this series possible. We would also like to extend our thanks to our featured artists and to all of our virtual attendees for taking the time to join us today. And on that note, it is my pleasure to welcome Public Art Fund's Artistic and Executive Director, Nicholas Baume. Nicholas will introduce today's featured speakers and join them for a conversation. Nicholas, I hand things over to you.
Thanks so much, Adriana. Lovely to see you, and wonderful to be here for another of our wonderful collaborative talks with Cooper Union. We really do share the values of this dialogue around art, and particularly in this case, sort of thinking about how public art has a really special role to play, and that hearing from artists directly about their ideas and their work is such a valuable way to amplify the exhibitions that we're doing, and of course the teaching that's happening all the time at Cooper Union. So I wanted to mention, just to start, that there is the option for closed captioning. So there's a button for that at the bottom of your screens. And as the proceedings go forward, if you would like to ask a question, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen as well. So I think what I'd like to do is really to take a moment before we begin to acknowledge, to offer our respect and gratitude to all of the Indigenous people, past and present, on whose ancestral lands we're presenting this exhibition, Global Positioning, which of course is taking place in Boston, in Chicago, and here where I am in New York City. So that's an important aspect of the exhibition, and I'm thrilled, in fact, that there are a number of Indigenous artists included in the exhibition. I want to thank our donors that make our talks program possible. Con Edison, the New York State Council on the Arts, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, of course, our always generous board, and our presenting sponsor, Bloomberg, who made Global Positioning possible, and very much to our partner in this ongoing series of exhibitions on bus shelters, JCDecaux, who incredibly generously provide us with the very valuable advertising space on bus shelters and kiosks and public furniture in these major cities. So, so thanks to all of those people. We're just in the process of doing installation shots because the exhibition's brand new, but here's a selection of images of the work as they now appear on these bus shelters in all kinds of different urban settings in these three cities. It's the work of 20 international artists, and they're appearing on 320 of the JC&Co bus shelters throughout these three cities. It's an exhibition that's really very much about collaboration. And I want to acknowledge my fantastic co-curators, Dan Palmer and Katerina Stathopoulou. And we work together on this exhibition. And the spirit of collaboration is really embedded in the exhibition, also in the sense that we invited 26 colleagues, artists, curators, educators around the world to nominate artists that they thought were really doing important work, were leading artistic conversations in their own communities, and really deserved the opportunity to be heard and seen in these cities. And that provided us with a fantastic sort of additional layer of research. And then the artists ultimately invited to participate are from 17 countries and across 6 different continents. So it's an incredibly diverse and interesting group of artists. They all have made work that shares an individual perspective on our current moment, the time and place where they are. But together, the exhibition also really reminds us of our mutual vulnerability, but also resilience, I think, that has united the world in different ways with the pandemic. It's an exhibition that really underlines, I think, the core values of Public Art Fund, that everybody should have access to great art free of charge, and that artists are essential to our civic dialogue, and that works like this have the power to spark conversations between people and open minds. So it's, I think, a wonderful occasion to hear directly from artists, and I'm thrilled that we have 3 amazing artists with us today. But before we do that, I want to share a video so you also get a glimpse of all 20 of the artists that are participating. So let's see the video.
My name is William Lori. I'm a Palestinian artist born and based in the UAE.
My name is Tony Albert. I am an Aboriginal artist living and working in Brisbane.
I'm Myriam Boulos. I'm a Lebanese photographer and I live and work in Lebanon in Beirut.
Aloha, my name is Sean Conway. I was born and raised on the island of Oahu.
My name is Ali Kazim. I'm based in Lahore, Pakistan.
I'm Dara Kanyisa, a maker of things from South Africa, based in Cape Town.
मेरा नाम पुष्पा कुमारी है.
My name is Karam Napoor. I currently live in the city of Tel Aviv.
My name is Nolan Oswald Dennis. I'm an artist from Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meu nome é Rosana Palmeiro, sou natural aqui de São Paulo.
My name is Denisse Ariana Pérez. I'm originally from the Dominican Republic and I am now based in Barcelona.
My name is Jason Fu. I'm an artist based between Sydney and Melbourne.
My name is Kwanshan Chi. I live and work in Hong Kong.
我是陈维，生活工作在北京和上海。
I'm Kailin Whiskey. I always live in Indorgana.
My name is Vasanta Yogananthan. I live in Marseille and I was born in France.
My name is Rufai Zakari. I was born in Ghana. Real global positioning.
we're joined now by Myriam Boulos. Myriam is a Beirut-based Lebanese photographer who really uses photography to explore and question the city of Beirut, her city, its people, and her place among them. Nolan Oswald Dennis, Johannesburg-based artist in South Africa, who's an interdisciplinary artist whose practice explores the material and metaphysical conditions of decolonization, questioning the politics of space and time through a system-specific rather than site-specific approach. And Denisse Ariana Pérez, who is a Barcelona-based artist from the Dominican Republic, who is also a writer, a photographer, is interested in people, nature, gender, culture, and language, and how they interact with one another, often at the intersection of fantasy and reality, art and social commentary, and particularly in regards to marginalized communities. So we will have the opportunity to hear from each one of these artists a little bit about their practice individually, and then we'll sort of reconvene for some collective discussion. And just to remind, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A, and hopefully we'll have time for that at the end. But now I'd like to invite Myriam. Myriam, over to you.
Thank you, Nicolas. I think that you said almost everything about me. Like you said, the essential things you have to know. So, hi everyone. I'm a Lebanese photographer. I was born in Lebanon. I lived here my entire life, and today I'm still here despite the current situation. I'm trying to find ways to be okay here. So I'm a photographer. I started taking pictures when I was 16. And from the first pictures I took, my approach was a mix of documentary and diary, like journaling. And I always use a direct flash. You can see this very clearly in all of my images. For me, it's a way of making things real and concrete. And it's also a way of literally putting the light on things that are oppressed and normalized when they shouldn't be. So these last 2 years, I've been mainly documenting the situation in Lebanon. For example, during the revolution, documenting the revolution was my way of taking part in it, and then documenting what happened after the explosion was also a way of dealing with the trauma and saying our stories from a local point of view. And today I'm trying to resist the situation in Lebanon. So I decided to finally work on my project on women's sexual fantasies in Lebanon. And I've been wanting to work on this for a few years now, since I discovered my own sexual fantasies. And okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project. So as we all know, women's bodies have mainly been portrayed through a male gaze, and in this series, we are the ones talking about our fantasies, owning them, taking back what belongs to us. And the image that I am showing in this exhibition, in this amazing exhibition, is a picture from this project. So actually how I proceed is by doing open calls. So I do open calls on social media for now, but I'm going to continue on paper, like in newspaper and in real life, on posters in the streets, etc. The open call says, if you identify as a woman and you want to share your sexual fantasies, send me an email. And the image that you see here is the collaboration I did with one of the women who answered to the open call. I don't know if I have enough time to read her answer, or we can do this later during the, I don't know. should I go ahead or?
I think we can come back to that.
Perfect, perfect. So that's it.
Did you want to show these other images? Yeah.
Yes, we have some example of my work here. So this is, yeah. It's a selection from different projects. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. There are a few images, and I think we can maybe just go through them kind of at random as I speak. Yeah, I mean, so my practice is generally interested in questioning the nature of everyday things, things that seem kind of stable or have like relatively stable meanings, and finding in those things much more uncertainty than we generally assume. And I guess the certainty that we assume in these everyday things, I sometimes think of as a function of hidden structures that kind of determine the way we see the world, and things, I guess, things that are not visible but functional. And so the struggle in my practice is always to make visible or to make shareable these things that are not necessarily accessible, or maybe more to the point, to make shareable the way we are permitted or not permitted to see the world. So for example, this work is from an ongoing series called the Black Liberation Zodiac, which looks at the night sky and the astronomical conventions we use to map it, so like the constellation system, and identifies in this apparently scientific project a kind of not so hidden, not so secret, but unacknowledged cultural project, which is to say something like the night sky across the entire planet is also an archive for Western mythological history. And to think about what the implications for that are for somebody like myself, who is from the global South, is from a place that is not implied in this history. And I guess the point of all of this in my practice is not just to question and identify the methods in which power kind of projects itself, but to realize that if things are so constructed, that they can be constructed differently, which is maybe obvious because clearly they once were constructed differently. But I'm really interested in how these methods and strategies might be misused or re-engineered or redeployed for other ends. So my practice is always looking for ways and means of kind of rehearsing or performing or offering space for others to join in a rehearsal or a performance of remaking things for our own ends, or for different ends, or for like decolonial ends, or beginnings of possibility. So you can maybe go to the work in the Global Positioning exhibition, and I can talk a little bit about that for a minute. As you can see, my work, a lot of my work is kind of diagrammatic, and I'm interested in that language. But for this exhibition, I was really thinking about the idea of shelter, a bus shelter, and what kind of work we might do while sheltering. So kind of what can be imagined and practiced whilst in a condition of sheltering, which is both what's happening in the exhibition, but also what I felt like I've been doing for the past 2 years. And of course, my interest in transformation is like aligned with interest in practices of divination, which are practices which see the world as it is yet to be. Also kind of game practices, which offer ways of being both in this world and in another world simultaneously. And so the work, which I'm sure we'll see maybe again later, the work in this exhibition is called Notes for a Planet, willfully in brackets. Yeah, this, this work. And I think of it as offering a kind of do-it-yourself constellation of worlds that may or may not exist, with the hope that people might, in the encounter with this world, together with what I've offered in the work, figure out how these worlds may or may not relate. And I think of this really as the kind of work that you do while waiting. You know, this is not the work of changing the world, but it's the work that you do when you wait. Yeah, the time before you act, which is maybe a nice thing to do whilst waiting at the bus stop. And these kind of, I don't know, I mean, I think all of these are kind of poetics of space and transformation that I'm really interested in. This question of do it yourself, a kind of almost X-ray analysis of part of the world that may or may not exist, and then finding ways to share that. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks, Nolan. Denise.
Hi everyone, my name is Denisse Ariana Pérez. I'm a photographer and copywriter based in Barcelona. A lot of my work is centered around, well, all of my work is centered around people. I mainly photograph or only photograph people, or people as they interact with their environments or with nature. So I would say I'm a human/people photographer. In this specific series for the Global Positioning exhibition is from a larger body of work called Agua, which means water in Spanish. And I've been just exploring this relationship and the interaction that human beings have or can have with water. And I believe that allowing ourselves to flow alongside with water can allow us to find some liberation, and it can allow us to let go of facades that we might have built, and it can allow us to connect with ourselves, not only to something greater, and it can be very healing and meditative. And a lot of my work, my process feels like a therapy session mixed with a photographic session. There's a lot of intimacy and a lot of creating a space of trust and intimacy with my subjects and guiding them through like breathing and connecting and really just letting go. Most of the people I photograph are real people, and they haven't been photographed in this manner or much in their lives. And I find that even more interesting to treat something aesthetically as art, but to deal with human psychology. Then we can see some, for this specific photograph, in a lot of my work, I think in my subjects, I also like to bend the rules of gender and play with androgyny or play with characters that might belong to different communities and sometimes marginalized communities, and play with those notions of femininity and masculinity. So we can see some of the other images. Yeah, so this larger series that I've been shooting for the last 3 years, I went through different parts of Africa and then ended up in Scandinavia, where I was living until recently. So I wanted to show the universality of water and the diversity and versatility of water and of human bodies as well. And yeah, specifically when it comes to men, I'm very interested in showcasing, representing men in a more, like, through a more sensitive lens, and allowing for more movement and vulnerability in the way that they're portrayed, especially when it comes to men of color.
Thank you so much, Denise. What a fantastic group of works, even in this small selection from the exhibition. I'm excited well, first of all, I'm so grateful to each of you for the work you've contributed to the exhibition, and for joining us today, and love to dig in a little more to some of the ideas that you've each raised. And I guess I'm curious too, because this whole exhibition making process isn't what we would have done pre-pandemic. The whole idea, the normal curatorial process of like site visits or studio visits and then site visits and that whole development of a dialogue, of course, can be a wonderful way to make an exhibition, but the pandemic also kind of threw us into a situation where we had to think about how to work differently. And in a sense, that also opened up new possibilities, because we wouldn't have thought about doing an exhibition like this, I think, pre-pandemic in this way, and being able to work with artists from so many different places simultaneously, and to create the dialogue, through these virtual means. So I'm curious, perhaps from your perspectives too, how that process has been, and how maybe making this work was different from perhaps other exhibitions or other approaches to making work you might have made. Myriam.
I can give a small answer. I think from my side, in this project in particular, since it's a collaboration and I'm asking for each woman where she wants to be photographed and how, most of them answered that they wanted to be photographed at home, which is because it's an intimate, we're talking about intimate things. So it was kind of easy with the pandemic and the whole context of the confinement and everything to photograph at home. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the big question has been the question of a kind of public artwork made in this very private way, at least for me, and also at this extreme distance, to think about a place, or to think about a work acting in place without a relationship to place. And maybe that's the first thing I started thinking about, but I kind of ended up with this kind of imaginary relationship to place, to the place of the exhibition, these three cities. And that's something that I'm still very much thinking through, is this kind of action at a distance, but also like this kind of imagined intimacy between myself and these bus shelters and the cities that they're in, which I think in other conditions, thinking about a public artwork made in this way would have been a bit too confusing. But I think under the conditions of lockdown, ongoing pandemic, it felt somehow possible, to be two places at once, you know.
Denise, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think I've had my work and like being exhibited in a public space before, but for example, it was in a completely different environment and it was more in close with nature. And I think in this particular situation, having work that people have like daily use for those interactions is not just, it's just placed in a public space, but it's actually people have time to contemplate while they sit at the bus shelter. It also, it made me put myself a lot in the shoes of someone who is sitting and facing and thinking of cities where there's a lot of rapid traffic, and what image would I like to show and show contrast to that rapid pace and something more contemplative. And like, I've lived in New York City and I put myself in the shoes of New Yorkers don't stop for anything. What would they stop for? And trying to think of the current political climate in the States. And there were many elements that made me ponder on what would be an image that could mean anything in this context and such a space with such a tempo. So yeah, that made it quite unique.
Yeah, I think one of the, from the perspective of our team, myself, Dan, Katerina, I think one of the things we were, aware of and interested in was, in one sense, we have the ability to be so connected. At the same time, I think the experience of the last couple of years has also been one to reveal perhaps some of those structural inequalities that Nolan, you've thought about, those kind of things that are occluded or submerged in some ways. And so wanting to think about how to invite artists and present work to New Yorkers who, despite Denise, that like busyness that everyone has kind of rushing and pursuing their own agenda, also I think a kind of renewed curiosity about and an awareness of the fact that the way people are experiencing their lives around the world are so different. And obviously, Myriam, you've been living through a state of crisis in Lebanon. Obviously the pace of the pandemic, the treatments, the vaccines, the accessibility to those things has been very different, in different parts of the world. So I think our hope was that to bring work like this together could, of course, allow us to share and learn, and have the audiences in New York and Boston and Chicago have some way of visualizing and having an aesthetic experience that maybe adds to that sense of curiosity.
And also, beyond the pandemic aspect of the situation, for me in general, photography is all about kind of doing a collage between what's happening in my head and outside of my head, like in my internal world and the exterior world. And I think that we already spoke about this, like the contrast between the intimacy of the subjects we are treating and the public aspect of the exhibition. I think it brings us back to what photography is for me at the beginning. Like, it's the very intimate work in a very public space, So for me, this is very strong, and And as Nolan was saying, you were saying that your work is about kind of, I don't know, this might not be the correct word, but kind of vulgarizing what we want to say to everyone in a way, not in a pejorative way, of course. But for me, this is very important in the location of this exhibition. Like for me, all exhibitions should be public. Yeah.
I love that word, vulgar.
Yeah.
I encountered it recently and used in a similar way. And I think for English speakers, it's quite a difficult word to hear, vulgarize. But I think I understand it to mean making things accessible to the majority of people, to take it out of like specialist or kind of sacred spaces and bringing it into the kind of world of the profane, which is exactly, I think, the place to be.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is one of the reasons why we use images as artists, because it's a language that is for everyone, even if, and it's super layered, but there is a first layer that we like, where we don't need words or anything. It's just there. We all see it. Yeah, I hope this makes sense, but yeah.
Yeah, I love that also, that going back to that more archaic sense of the vulgar, the vulgarizing. And of course, when we think about the context of the bus shelters, it is advertising. And of course, what could be more the common language in the contemporary world than the language of advertising? And so I think it's super interesting to me to have that opportunity to kind of subvert expectation in the space of advertising. And some works kind of use that language, and so it kind of slips under the radar. Other work maybe, seems to kind of immediately refute that language. So it's interesting to see the kind of different strategies at a time when, of course, public art has become so much more important in the sense of being, for a long time, the only kind of public forum for displaying art when museums and galleries had to be closed.
Maybe the other thing, or the other side of the vulgarization is that when you do this, you also, and I don't like to use this kind of hierarchical imagination, but there is an act of kind of sanctifying what are assumed to be kind of low places, So the bus stop takes the place of the museum, and in some kind of real way carries the weight of that, which I think is, at least for me, was something I was trying to think about as well. Is what is really possible as a kind of gesture, an artistic gesture, let's say, in the space, to think of the space as I think of any other space that I would like to and do exhibit in.
Denise, I know you've done a lot of work with sort of publications and magazines, and I wonder if that space of advertising is something you're interested in, or how you think about that.
Well, the thing is that I've worked and also work as a copywriter, so I understand the other side of creating work as advertisement and trying to infuse that with some artistic subversions. I understand both sides. And I think that, I understand that language, even if I refute it myself, even if I try to push it to its limits, because I think it can do so much more. But I think that there's some powerful things to learn from advertising, like language that is, I wouldn't say that is like it intends to manipulate, but language that is trying to really go directly into the psyche of a reader or a viewer. And I think that's very interesting as well. I think both worlds can learn from each other, not on the traditional way of looking at advertising as just a transaction, but like how to think creatively within the advertising mind, but towards something different, through something more cultural and global and artistic and deeper. So yeah, I think I would say I speak both languages in a way.
Yeah, I think that's sort of clear in your work, which it does feel like it taps into that emotional vein, very readily, and sort of creates that moment of intimacy. It strikes me as I kind of listen to the conversation, the way that these different worlds, we're talking about different worlds. There's the advertising world, there's the art making world, there's the interior world, there's the fantasy world, there's this kind of sense of multiple worlds, all existing and having their own reality, and it seems like each of you are somehow colliding worlds or reanimating them, and that the art happens somehow in the space between those different worlds.
I could definitely agree to that. I would say so. I think playing with worlds is daring and interesting. It's the acknowledgement that they exist, and is our choice to how we want to interpret them and how we want to challenge them. So I think, at least that's how I see it, that is our challenge as artists.
I agree completely too. I don't know if it was a question or a statement, but I agree with the statement. And actually, this is kind of a big question in my work in this project in particular, because you were talking about interior world, and what I'm trying to do is document fantasies, and I'm asking myself a lot, what is the place of the image in this project, in documenting this world that is an interior world of fantasies. So yes, I'm just asking a question too, out loud. I'm not saying something in particular, but yeah.
Nolan, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that structure of moving between, conjuncting, tearing apart worlds is something that I'm really, really interested in. And for me, the question is always like maybe whose worlds, which worlds, and who has the authority or the wherewithal or the possibility, the opportunity to do this kind of betweenness. And that betweenness is both like is both a privilege, but it's also a kind of daily reality, like a lived reality. People have to move in between worlds in order to survive. But the question is how, or who kind of has the, I guess, the potential to make those movements visible. And I think this is what a lot of artists are really incredibly like potent at doing, is to kind of reveal these relationships between worlds, and really difficult worlds. I think like the relationship between the inner world and the mad outside world is one of the hardest and most important relationships. But there's so many. And I guess for me, that's always the thing that I'm trying to do with my work, is firstly for myself understand what is the kind of field of worlds, you know, what is the kind of multiverse that we're moving through, and also how to share a, I don't know, like a grammar for people to kind of build their own connections in a way. Yeah.
I think, no, I really, I think that's definitely the case. And so interesting to see I mean, how differently that question gets answered by each of the 20 artists in the exhibition. And also how this idea of artists being a part of civic dialogue has really, I think, taken a lot of steps forward. I mean, it kind of hand in hand with the idea of public art is the idea of the public artist, right? The artist whose voice becomes public in a more sort of distributed way, in a more vulgarized way, to use our earlier term. I don't know if we have a few questions, and we just have a few minutes left if people do want to answer a question, to ask a question. And one of those was just very simple about sort of how the works are located in these 3 different cities. And of course, that's not a question the artist can answer, because that's sort of part of the process that is more on the exhibition organizing side. I wonder, and certainly everyone listening in should go to the Public Art Fund website, and we have a terrific map that actually shows each of the 3 cities and shows each of the locations of the 320 different works in each of those cities, and you can search by where you are or by artist's name. So it's another diagram that's kind of a part of this whole experience. So Nolan, I hope you've checked it out. And it was noted that there aren't any in Midtown in the question, and of course, a part of the way this is structured, we do, for instance, in New York, there are works in all 5 boroughs. So it's a truly citywide exhibition. And a part of what's really special about it is that bus routes go everywhere. So, whether it's the Bronx or Queens or Staten Island or Harlem or Brooklyn or Manhattan, there are places to see these works, but they tend, to be more widely distributed because, of course, the most sought after advertising space is, the Manhattan, Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue, all of the sort of peak kind of retail places. So because we're, benefiting from the largesse of JCDecaux, and they actually are in business to sell advertising, we of course, we are allocated and thrilled, to use those shelters that really give us a kind of a cross-section of the entire city. I don't know if any of the others have thoughts on that you wanted to add. Have you had a look at the maps of the different cities?
I did, but I actually never went to the US, so I don't really have an input on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been trying to work out a bit of almost like a game to send friends who live in Boston, Chicago, New York, little connect the dots to take photos for me. So that's my relationship with the maps.
I'm just having a look at sort of questions coming in. One question was sort of about Nolan's work and actually to share some of the words that are in the work for global positioning. I guess being on screen and smaller scale, it might have been hard to actually, you know, to see some of those words and phrases that are being mapped. So I wonder if you could just talk for a moment about that.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and find the work on my computer and read it, because there's a way to read the work, and I'm gonna try and do that if I can find it.
Great.
Okay, it goes something like this. I'm just gonna start randomly and see if it works. Shadow worlds, disclose, landless worlds, half worlds, queer worlds, fleshy worlds, almost worlds, Africanized free worlds, taken worlds, return as hidden worlds, inform future worlds, empty worlds, assume private worlds, improvised worlds, transform home as a world, secret worlds, perform a survival. Yeah, it's just a kind of grid, almost like a game, like a board game, with different kind of types of worlds or kind of archetypes of worlds, and then potential relations between them. And the idea is that all of the connections are just indicative or descriptive, no, not descriptive, just like indicative of a process, and that people who encounter the work would continue that process of kind of mapping possible relations between these worlds.
Great. Great, thanks for sharing that, Nolan. There's also a question that I think Denise and Myriam might be able to answer, which was sort of how you identify the subjects for your images, and then get the funding to do those kinds of amazing works.
I can answer because it's very simple from my side. As I already said, I do open calls. And so, because actually these last 2 years, I realized how aggressive image making can be. So for this project in particular, I didn't want to go myself, ask women, like, hi, can I photograph you? And can you share your fantasies? So I preferred just doing open calls, and it's the women who want to participate who come to me and who send me an email. So I don't really choose who I photograph. Yeah.
And Denise?
Yeah, I think for me it's quite, yeah, I think My subjects, they vary, so it depends, but a lot of times I find people literally on the street and I'll stop them, but I don't shoot people. Usually the photographs that you saw, they were not spontaneous, of course, like I prepared them. So most of the time I come across people like in their daily life in the street, and then I ask them if I could photograph them, but I don't take their number. I give them the choice and I give them my information, and I give them my number and access to like my Instagram name. They can see my work and then they can choose if they want to be part of it. So there is just giving them the power to choose a lot of times. But it depends if there's something more specific, like there was an image that you showed where there was a young man living with albinism. So for that project, I was looking for like specifically for people living with albinism. So I collaborated together with some organizations in different countries. And then from their own communities, then they would make like a roster, and then I would select who I wanted to photograph. So we did it collaboratively. I also, if it's working with a specific community, I prefer like collaborating with people who are actually working with those communities, not just like me going into the community, but so there's that trust that can be built. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I think we're up to sort of our time now. I think we've had just a sort of a small taste of that each of you are involved in. I think each one of you has an extraordinary body of work. I would really encourage everyone more research, and certainly go to publicartfund.org to also get kind of more information about each of the artists, and to check out the maps and see where you can find their work. Sort of interesting challenges of doing an exhibition like this, of course, as you're working around the world, you're also working on different time zones. So, so some people it's the middle of the night, some people it's the middle of the day. I'm really appreciative that that each of you have taken the time to share your ideas with us today. And I know I speak on behalf of all of us at Public Art Fund and everyone who joined today. Thank you, and just express our appreciation for the amazing work you're doing. So on that note, look forward to seeing you, I hope, in person sometime in the future. It'd be wonderful to welcome you all to New York at some point, or back to New York for some of you. And we'll have another panel later in the season on global positioning and other great public programs in the Cooper Union series. So we'll keep you posted on all of that. But for now, thanks so much to Myriam, Nolan, and Denise.